Hi everyone, it's Rebecca. Welcome to my final project where I will be talking about ideal inclusion. I'd like to share some of my ideas about inclusion. I am pro-inclusion all the way, and not only will I tell you some of the reasons why, but also give some ideas about what ideal inclusion might look like moving forward, or at least in my opinion. So let's jump right in with disability labels. This might be pretty controversial, but my idea of ideal inclusion does not include labels. From a medical model standpoint, and as an initial diagnosis, I do believe that labels are helpful in determining where to start with researching the types of support a student might need. However, these labels are often so broad that they aren't very helpful without extensive research and interactions with the student. Here's why I have a problem with labels. Despite the growth and development of disability education, antiquated thoughts and practices still exist within society. Language is instrumental in demonstrating the attitudes and beliefs of human beings. How a society perceives its members is established through its language. Using outdated and seemingly offensive labels such as handicapped indicates the view of a particular culture towards its members with disabilities. Generalized labels are the main culprit in our society's continued bias against individuals with disabilities. The labels being used in school systems are for teachers, administrators, parents, and policymakers, and were never intended to be for the student. The student is not the one who gave themselves that label, and more than likely does not define themselves by that label, or at least not by that label alone, which is often their only identifier in school. Reading through some articles recently, I found this, a student's own words on his disability label. I'm going to read it out loud, but I might take a few liberties with tone. I hate that word. There's an IEP teacher and I met with her and there was a worksheet and what is your disability? I hated that. I hated filling that out. This isn't the only instance, nor will it be the last, in which a person's disability label has been used to define them. The way we talk about disability needs to change. The connotations and denotations of the labels that we put on disability in general are extremely harmful. This can be illustrated with the book cover I came across. This is an actual book. How to Cope with Disability and Still Have a Meaningful Life. Yikes. What are some other current practices that might be able to be changed? Well, glad you asked. When reading about inclusion practices, does anything feel, out of touch sometimes? You might be feeling that way because academic interventions are predicated on the idea that there is a normal way to function inside of school, and that certain needs are abnormal or more difficult to accommodate as a result of individual deficits, not structural or institutional choices. This fixation is essentially detrimental to students in that it perpetuates an ideology of normal through its narrow definition of success. English-only initiatives, RTI practices, the ideas surrounding the achievement gap, and disproportionate representation in special education stem from the same idea of normal in our school systems. Research on this proposes a shift in this definition of normal towards reconstructing normal as variability. IEPs, or Individualized Education Plans, are on the forefront of this battle, focusing on individual student needs. The concept of UDL, or Universal Design for Learning, is also bringing about this shift, creating more equitable general education classrooms. This brings us to our next topic of conversation, the classroom environment. As most of us are secondary education pre-service teachers, I'm sure you've all seen this before. Rows of uniform desks, all facing forward, very no-nonsense. Each student is assigned to their own little island for the duration of the class, not to deviate from the others. While the desks can be arranged differently, most schools have these desks, or these types of desks, as the only space for students in the classroom. But what if a secondary education classroom could look like this? Something I find very important in an ideal inclusion classroom is the setting itself. This space is visually appealing and comforting, which can promote a sense of belonging right off the bat. Softer lighting creates a calm atmosphere, and the setup encourages student collaboration and connection. Keeping inclusive literature, such as an American Sign Language poster on the wall, is also invaluable in the classroom. This can be a bridge between all students, regardless of ability. Participating in, or even just making note of important dates in regards to specific disability awareness can be a crucial step in creating an inclusive and cohesive classroom environment, so all students can feel seen and heard. Taking the time and effort to understand each student's unique language background is ideal, and celebrating and supporting multiple literacies in the classroom should be encouraged, especially when it comes to English language learners. Expressing appreciation for all levels of English proficiency and providing resources or using applications for learning and understanding should be acceptable in the classroom and not seen as a deficit. This brings us to another important part of the classroom environment, which is adaptive or assistive technology. While it is important for teachers to understand where students come from in terms of educational background, literacy, and language, it's also important for us to anticipate any assistive technology or adaptive technology that students might need. Because for most of us, technology makes things easier. For a person with a disability, it makes things possible. In an ideal inclusive classroom, teachers would be supplied with low-tech assistive technology, such as adaptive scissors, a magnifying glass, pencil grips, and a buzzer. While this might not be as supportive as one might think, these little things can really help students in the classroom in an inclusive setting. While low-tech assistive and adaptive technology should be a baseline for all classrooms, higher tech such as iPads and subsequent apps should be provided by the school or district. With these devices, students are able to personalize them to fit their individual needs, as iPads can carry out more than one function, such as personal communication, as well as provide access to classwork. Another bonus is that there are numerous apps that can be useful to teaching students with multiple needs. The need for AT in classrooms leads directly into my next point: law and policy. One point of conflict that's come up multiple times in our discussions revolves around policy. Values inherent in terms from IDEA, such as opportunity, high expectation, and access, for example, were not defined by policymakers, and therefore could be expected to be difficult to define and agree on during implementation. We've seen a lot of this in our readings, and I can guarantee that there is no one way these policies are implemented. Because of vague policies, FAPE can be determined in many different ways, leading to inequitable practices regarding special education services for students. Neither the Supreme Court nor Congress has yet addressed the standard for alleged denial of FAPE based on either or both of two implementation issues: failure to implement fully the provisions of the recent IEP, or inability to implement fully the proposed IEP. Not only is the inability to determine discrepancies regarding access to services harmful to students with disabilities, it is also responsible for the overrepresentation of minorities and ELL students, especially LD and ED. While policies had begun to look towards regulations, this July, the Department of Education under the Trump administration made a controversial move to delay regulations to address the disproportionality for students of color in special education under IDEA. In short, we need clearer policies in effect that will combat racism, income bias, monolingualism, and several other isms that I did not mention. We need accountability in terms of providing services. Do I know exactly how to do this? No, I don't. But it would be ideal. The last piece in my idea of ideal inclusion centers around community engagement and responsibility, creating changes that will last generations. I think Baglieri said it best. With the world as its forum, work to create inclusive schools and communities is a project shared by young people, families, educators, neighbors, employers, activists, and policymakers. In short, all of us. We all have a responsibility to ourselves and to others. Humanizing disability is at the heart of all of this. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen and read this along with me. The last few slides are citations, so please look at them if you'd like. Hope everyone's doing well and is staying safe.